Pnawn da bawb. I can see we've got a good number of people in the room, and we've got loads to get through this afternoon. So I'm gonna crack on, and I'm sure more people will join us as we go along. So welcome everybody to this Shelter Cymru webinar. It's a horrible afternoon. At least it is here in Treorchy. I don't know what it's like with you, but we've got thunder and hail and everything. So hopefully everybody's internet connections will do what they're supposed to, and you'll be able to stay with us for the next 2 and a bit hours. We've got lots to get through. The subject for today, as you know, is about sharing ideas about how to prevent homelessness this winter. It's a very tough time at the moment. I know that's stating the obvious, but it really is, and things are only going to get tougher. There aren't any instant solutions to the shortage of affordable homes, which we're all having to deal with. I know our demand at Shelter Cymru is at unprecedented levels at the moment. We're doing what we can to prevent homelessness everywhere we can, but we can only imagine the pressure that local authority services are under. So we wanted to use this webinar as an opportunity to provide a supportive space for ideas and good practice to be shared. We at Shelter Cymru, we have these regular meetings internally where we review casework trends. And something that has been coming up a lot lately are these examples of innovation that we've been hearing in the way that local authorities have been responding to the pressures that we're facing by reviewing the way that services are designed to enable that focus on prevention to continue when there are so many people coming through the door. We've been hearing examples of using existing funding in new ways as well to keep people in their homes. So we really wanted to dig into that good practice in this session this afternoon. So this is how it's going to run today. The first half of the webinar, we're going to be hearing from a number of different service managers from Welsh local authorities about different ways to design and deliver statutory services. Then we're going to do something which I think is a really good innovation for a webinar. We're going to have a comfort break, which you don't often get with this kind of thing. 10 minutes, go away, have a cup of tea, do what you need to do, and then come back for the second half when we're going to be looking at the potential for rent rescue, mortgage rescue, these kinds of initiatives, actually buying properties and bringing them into the social stock to enable people to remain in their homes. We've also got some, we're going to be doing some voting, some live voting during the course of this webinar as well, to make it a bit more interactive. So if I can get you now to have your phone with you, if you've got your phone, because I'm going to be showing you how you can log on to this voting software. If you don't have a phone, you can still take part by opening another window on your browser. But I think it's a bit easier if you have your phone with you. So please do have it with you. Before we carry on, I just want to say a big thank you to the Oak Foundation, who've sponsored today's webinar. Oak have sponsored previous webinars that we've run around preventing homelessness as well. And they've supported Shelter Cymru hugely in recent years to do work around homelessness prevention. We've done so much thanks to the support of the Oak Foundation. Thank you again for supporting us today. Just as a reminder to you, I think you can already see in your top left corner that this is being recorded. And we're going to be putting it on our YouTube channel, the Shelter Cymru YouTube channel afterwards, so you can look back at it, you can share it with your colleagues as well. Only the panelists have got audio and video. Okay, so if you are a delegate here today, then you can absolutely ask questions. Do it through the Q&A function at the bottom there that you can see. There is a chat, but that chat has been disabled. So please would you use the Q&A there, and then we'll look at your questions as we get to the discussion sections of the panels. Yes, we're going to do a little bit of voting now to well, let's see how smoothly this works, eh? So have your phones at the ready, and I'm going to share my screen. Before we get into the voting, I just wanted to put this up on the screen because I think increasingly in Shelter Cymru, we're aware that people are getting into housing problems left, right and centre, including people who've never experienced housing problems before, including housing professionals. And I know we've got all sorts of different people here this afternoon. So I just wanted to flag this up to you. If you are having any problems, or if anyone you know is having difficulties, then this is how you can get advice on your housing situation through Shelter Cymru. So there's a Get Advice resource on our website, which it's an enormous resource. There's lots of information on there about people's housing rights in all sorts of different situations. We're in the middle of doing an enormous renting homes update at the moment, which is keeping us very busy, as I'm sure you can imagine, which will hopefully switch over and everything will go according to plan on the 1st of December. But the website is a really good first port of call for you. There is also the helpline there as well, which is open Monday to Friday during morning hours, 9:30 till 12:30. I have also put the training link in there as well. If you are interested in getting training from Shelter Cymru, I know that some little thing called the Renting Homes Act is around the corner. Lots of people have had training in it already, but if you haven't, then please do get in touch. So I just wanted to put that out there because you know, housing issues, it's not us and them anymore in the housing sector, because I'm hearing increasingly of people who work in housing and who are having out their own housing issues as well. So there we are. I've put that in front of you anyway. Now then, we're going to go on to a very serious policy question now. Don't worry, we haven't lost the plot completely. This is a test question, okay? So I'm going to go on to the next slide now. And we're using a really funky thing called Slido, okay? As you can see on the top left, there is a QR code, okay? So if you can take your phone and scan that QR code, if you can, so get onto your camera function on your phone and put it up close to the QR code, that will take you directly. Oh, someone's already in there. Fantastic. Okay, here we go. And it does, as you can see, it does a word cloud. And I mean, we've been taking bets inside Shelter Cymru about which biscuit is going to win this poll, right? But if you're having trouble getting on, you can use the left hand at the bottom there. You can see join@slido.com. So you can just go straight to the website as well. And if you put in that particular that number there with the hashtag, that'll take you there, okay? Or you can do it by opening up another screen on your browser. But oh, look at this. I feel like we're getting like an extra insight into how the Welsh housing and homelessness sector really goes, you know. Interestingly, I mean, I don't want to anticipate because the votes are still coming in, but it's really funny that Wendy Dearden was pretty confident that the winner would be chocolate digestive. And I think she might have won that bet. So fantastic. There we are. And yeah, chocolate hobnobs, they are a bit like crack. It's true, isn't it? I know once you start, you can't stop. And especially if you dip in them as well, isn't it? Okay, well done, everybody. I think we have got that one working. So I am going to go on to a more serious question now. Okay, so thank you very much. I can see the votes are still coming in. Lemon puff. I've never had one of those, but they do sound really nice. And yeah, of course, anything vegan. I think most of these you can have as a vegan version these days, can't you? All right, well done, everyone. That's fantastic. We're going to go on to a serious question now, okay? I'm sorry about that. The next question is, what do you consider to be the main barrier in preventing homelessness this winter? Now, I think what would help us with the word cloud, this should automatically go over to on your phone. Keep it as short an answer as you can. I think that will be really helpful. Okay, so like one word is your ideal, but yeah, keep it short and sweet like that. That's perfect. Wow, this is it's fascinating actually to see it coming through. Let's give it a sec to come through. Lack of housing, lack of accommodation is absolutely there, isn't it? Yeah. And we've also got, you can see that there's lack of affordable accommodation, no accommodation. You know, the word cloud hasn't picked those up, but they are the same theme, aren't they? You can see that all the way around. Lack of creativity, that's an interesting one. I mean, I think, you know, that's partly what this afternoon is about looking at the creative ideas that people have had already and stimulating some thinking about looking outside the box. Capitalism. Oh, we got some reds in the room. It's really interesting. But I mean, there's a massive theme there, as you can see, isn't it? Political will. That's really interesting as well. Section 21's in there as well, which I can absolutely, yeah, I mean, that's huge. It's a quarter of Shelter Cymru casework at the moment is Section 21's. And local housing allowance being so low as well. We've recently been running a campaign on that, which I don't think, unfortunately, had the impact on the autumn statement, but the fight continues. Thank you, everyone. We're keeping the results from this, by the way. So we're going to share them on social media afterwards. Okay, well, that's a really useful scene setter for the session as we go on today. Lack of housing, lack of accommodation has come out absolutely front and center. And there's no magic wand, unfortunately, is there? So okay, we're going to pause this for now. We've got some more voting coming along shortly. By the way, one thing I do need to say before we go on to the next session is on your Slido, there's a Q&A function there. Can you don't use that because we're not going to be monitoring that for questions. So if you've got questions and stuff you want to say, stick it in the Q&A function here on Zoom. Don't use the Q&A function on Slido if that's okay. Otherwise, my brain's going to explode monitoring everything. Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll return to some of that voting shortly. I'm now going to hand over to our first panelists. So we're going to be talking about designing services with a preventative focus. And I'm really pleased that 3 Welsh local authorities have agreed to speak, and each of them are going to give us a short presentation on what they've done. So we've got Ailey Dury from Cardiff Council, we've got Sarah Jones and Lydia Jones from Anglesey, and we've got Joy Williams and Angie Bowen from Carmarthenshire. So first of all, can I please introduce Ailey Dury from Cardiff Council?
Hiya, thanks very much, Jenny. Now bear with me, let's make sure I can share my slide. Can people see that? Gonna hope you can. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Jenny, and thank you to Shelter for hosting this event. As you very articulately put it, I think now more than ever we're seeing a need to focus on prevention and challenges to services that we've not seen before. So my name's Ailey. I'm the Prevention Development Manager at Cardiff Council. So I oversee our sort of entire prevention service, and I'll go into a bit more about kind of what that looks like as the presentation goes on. So as I'm sure you're all aware, in 2015, the Housing Wales Act came into force in Wales, putting a much more of a focus on prevention as a tool to alleviate homelessness. When this came into play, we initially in Cardiff had officers assessing all people who presented to us, regardless of kind of their housing need, managing cases and doing their best to prevent homelessness. However, as a service, we recognised that there was maybe more of a need for specialist teams within the housing options team to focus specifically on that prevention of homelessness. So in 2019, we created the Homeless Prevention Team. This was initially 10 members of staff. It's been increased now to 15 plus additional specialist officers roles, which I'll talk about a bit more later. And the idea behind this was that they would be officers specifically whose job it was to prevent homelessness, working in a more creative manner, working with hopefully slightly lower caseloads of people, trying to kind of work with a person-centered approach to resolve their homelessness. And when we were recruiting for this team, we had a strong kind of focus on that creativity, on the ability to work with vulnerable people, and kind of buying into those sort of values that I just mentioned as well. But it wasn't just the prevention team alone that we created. We also created a team of housing support workers who specialise in supporting people with tenancy related needs and helping them into alternative accommodation or keeping them in their homes where possible. And we also created the private rented team because it was also recognised that we needed to work with private landlords in order to resolve housing needs, both again by keeping people in their homes, but also by helping move people into alternative accommodation. So a huge part of the prevention service, as I said, in terms of our values, was being person-centred. So during our restructure in 2019, the whole service received training on psychologically informed environments. This partly helped to kind of reshape how we as a service operated to be much more trauma-informed, and also recognising some of the barriers that people may be faced when presenting to us, but also barriers that we might be unintentionally putting up as a service, and trying to work to bring those barriers sort of back down, you know, from small things like physical glass windows in between interview rooms, you know, the colours of the walls, to how people heard about the service and how easy it was to come to our service, and how we kind of more came out to people as well. We also focused a lot on using the data that we were collecting every month for Welsh Government and for our own purposes to identify where the service was succeeding and where we could improve. So, you know, we know that if someone comes to our service as a case that is threatened with homelessness, we prevent 80% of those people from becoming homeless, which is something that we're really proud of. But we also then realised there were cohorts of people that weren't coming to our service until they were already homeless. And using the data that we collect, we found that the vast majority of homeless on the day, or the biggest cohort of people presenting as homeless on the day, were 18 to 25-year-olds. Often these are people who were already living in precarious housing, so they were maybe sofa surfing, living with family, friends, but not really in settled accommodation. So using this data, we've worked with a marketing team to develop, are currently developing marketing to target specifically that cohort. So it's we've worked with younger people to develop the marketing itself. It's going to be very accessible on things like social media. There's going to be kind of an app that they can download that will take them to support sites. And it's also going to be developed to be rolled out in schools as well. So the idea is hopefully we'll get more people in at a much earlier stage, and hopefully then we can work with them to resolve that housing need. And also part of being person-centred is, as I've mentioned before, trying to work creatively to resolve homelessness. So utilising funding available, so not only kind of the standard funding streams like our DHPs and housing support grants, but being able to use something like the Homeless Prevention Fund, which is something we got given last year and then got renewed again this year. You know, we can really use that sort of funding in the most creative way possible. So an example of that I think is a really good sort of example of how we can be creative is we had a woman who had been offered social housing. She had been rough sleeping. She'd been working in our hostels to get her to a point where she was ready for independent living. She was offered a social accommodation flat, and her support worker noticed that she was really struggling in it. She was going back towards people who were street homeless, starting to fall back into that lifestyle again. And so they approached our service and said, you know, is there any funds that we can use to buy her vouchers to decorate her flat? She doesn't need furniture, she's got furniture, but I want her to be allowed to feel like it's her home. So we could use something like the Homeless Prevention Fund to provide those vouchers for her, which enabled her to, you know, alongside the support from her support worker, make it feel more like her home and help her to kind of adapt from living in hostel accommodation to living independently. So a huge part of it is approaching that with a kind of open mind and not being too kind of prescriptive with how we're looking at using those funds, but trying to be as kind of, yeah, as creative as possible whilst when considering them. Another thing for us is addressing that root cause of homelessness. So not just looking at it from a position of trying to prevent something for 6 months, so that is the legislation, but really trying to look at what happened, what led to this. We often say that homelessness is a symptom of other things. Sometimes it's not, but sometimes it's also a symptom of other things that are happening. So what is going on, and how do we address that to hopefully prevent homelessness in the long term? This isn't easy, and a big part of this is about building trust, building relationships with the people that we're working with, letting them feel, you know, that we're going to be listened to, that they're respected, that they can tell us a little bit more about what's going on. That does take time, that does take, you know, emotional resilience, but it's really important for us in terms of going forward, how we prevent people in the long term. And hopefully then, we always say, you know, the best thing is if we never see someone again. So that's always the aim for us in that sense. And then we also look at sort of supporting people after their homelessness duty has ended. So if we offer some sort of financial package of support, be that on the rented advance, a rent rescue, a rent top up, you know, something like that, we always offer a 3-month check-in. So after the first rental payment, the second rental payment, and the third rental payment, and that's one of our officers checking in with the person, giving them a call, dropping them an email, how's everything going, any issues at all, similarly with the landlord, just so that support doesn't stop, it sort of tapers off, and if anything does come up in those first few months, it's just nipping that in the bud as quickly as we possibly can, so that it doesn't snowball into something that becomes much more serious. Another huge part of kind of what we do and what's so integral for us in terms of preventing homelessness is partnership working. So as I sort of said at the start, we've got 15 core prevention officers. They are people who kind of, I say day-to-day, they deal with day-to-day prevention cases. There's no such thing as day-to-day prevention cases, but yeah, cases that come in, such as notices to quit, the affordability, overcrowding, suitability, those sort of queries. And then we also have specialist officers that have a specific cohort of people that they work with. These have been created because it was recognised that these people would benefit from having kind of those specialist officers who worked very closely with specific agencies around those kind of that cohort of people, and having that single point of contact for those partners and for that person was always a really positive thing. So we've got a young person's officer. She works with anyone from the age of 16 to 25, and she is someone who, you know, works really closely with Careers Wales, with our partner agency Llamai, who run our sort of homeless service and our youth mediation service. And she works very closely with sort of youth services as well, and is doing a bit of work with youth justice. So she's providing that kind of point of contact for all those agencies, and trying to get as much support as she can for the young people presenting. And you know, a lot of what we see for young people is relationship breakdowns with family. So she does a lot of work with parents, relatives, friends, to try and kind of, if possible, keep people where they are, but if not, kind of move them on in a timely manner, so we're not waiting till that breaking point when we've got very little time to look at helping someone move on. We also have a prison leavers officer, so she works across kind of Wales for anyone who's homeless on release from prison in Cardiff. So she works with all of the kind of prisons, in particular Cardiff prison, because that's where we see most of our prison leavers, but you know, also very closely with Park and Eastwood Park for the female prison leavers. She works with our sort of probation as well, DFODL, the police, the MAPA kind of coordinators, and again, trying to, especially for the prisoner leavers, because they very often can't present themselves when they're in prison, it's really important that information sharing is in place, that the housing pathway for them is something that we sort of suggest in advance, and they can have a look at it. If they agree with it, let us know. If they don't agree with it, we can build it with them. So trying to make sure that that line of communication is always open with the partners, and ideally with that person if possible. And then we've also got our mental health officer. So she's based in Llandoch, which is a mental health specialist hospital just outside Cardiff. And her role is to help people who are nearly ready or ready for discharge with any kind of sort of housing need they might have. So it might be that they are homeless on release. It might be that their home is no longer suitable for them on release, on discharge, or it might be that they've not paid their rent since being in hospital, so they're facing eviction for that set. So it's trying to look at what housing need do they have and how do we address that before discharge, so they're not taking up spaces in beds in hospital, but they're also coming out of hospital into some sort of planned or settled accommodation. But partnership working isn't just about these offices, it's also working with other partners, and we've done a lot of work with partners across the board in Cardiff to develop referral mechanisms, notification processes, and the idea behind this is trying to avoid people having to repeat their story time and time again. So as I said in the previous slide, looking at potential barriers to services and being more trauma informed. We don't want someone to go to one place, tell them their story, they come to us, we ask them to repeat that story again. We know that's not good for anyone. So we've developed referral mechanisms with people like the Welsh Refugee Council. So one of the positives to come out of the pandemic was we learned that someone in NAS accommodation didn't have to receive their notice to quit for us to help them. We could pick them up at an earlier stage and work with them. So we've been working with the Welsh Refugee Council to refer people to us as soon as they get their leave to remain in the UK, so then we can hopefully avoid them coming through with that 28-day notice, which is really limited. We've been working with RISE and the domestic abuse projects around Cardiff, such as the Dean Project and Bowzo, to develop a Tell Us Once form. So if anyone presents to either ourselves, to RISE, to the Dean Project, to Bowzo, then we'll fill out this form and then send it to the other partner organisation should housing be needed or should domestic abuse support be needed, again to minimise that person having to retell that story, retell what they've been through, and we can pick up that support at a much sooner stage. We work very closely with Shelter. We have an embedded shelter worker once a week coming to our central library hub who offers legal support to our clients, and we can refer to them and she can refer back to us as well where needed. And we also meet with Shelter monthly to kind of look at reviewing how we're getting on, what can be improved, what they're seeing, what we're seeing, how we can best work together. And we also have someone in the Heath Hospital as well, so looking at people who maybe are ready for discharge in the Heath Hospital and how we can best sort of support them and referrals to us going forward. We do work with a lot of other people, but this is a bit of a snapshot of kind of how we're trying to develop our service to be more, to pick up earlier cases and try to, as I said, avoid people having to repeat that story as much as we possibly can. So going forward for us, we as a prevention service are changing again. We are moving into the community a little bit more. So what we do isn't changing, but how we do it is slightly changing. So coming out of the pandemic, something we all realised we missed was being face-to-face with people, as I said before, building those relationships, gaining that trust. It's not nearly as successful over the phone or over email as it is in person. So we're looking to be more community-based, so in our hubs, but also, for example, with probation for our prison officer, maybe setting with youth services for our young persons officer. So we're trying to be more easily accessible for people. We want to be more visible as well. As Jenny said at the start of this, I think we're going to see a lot of people who've never needed to use our services before, possibly never heard of our services before. So it's really important that we're there, we're available, and that we're visible for people who needs us. Working in closer partnerships with agencies within our local authority. So as we're going out into the community a lot more, we're going to be working much more closely with other council services such as our money advice team, our interwork services, our hub services in general. And again, it's looking at making sure they know what we do. So if someone comes to them and says, I'm really struggling with paying my rent, they know they can refer to us and we can pick that person up as quickly as possible to work with them. We've also got various private rented programs launching and that have launched coming up that are targeted towards landlords to engage landlords with us, get landlords wanting to work with us, working with landlords to support them to getting their properties ready for letting and how they can do that, especially with the Renting Homes Act coming up. You know, we want to be there to offer that support for them and assist them with supporting their tenants going forward as well. So I just wanted to kind of finish with this slide on the core values that we have as a prevention service. And I guess for us, there's been a lot of change since we were created in 2019. And I think it's what's kept us going and what's kept us delivering the service. And I think what for us and for me is so important going into these winter months to make sure that we're still delivering on what we wanted to deliver. So building relationships, you know, with people who come to us, with other teams and with partners is so important, and maintaining those relationships is going to be even more important, I think, in the next few months. Early intervention, I know the legislation is 56 days, but for us, if we can get you before a problem escalates or before something becomes unpreventable, then we want to do that. So, you know, trying to work with people at that early stage, as soon as kind of there is a problem around their housing or a housing need, you know, picking that up and trying to work with them. Evaluating the service. So as I said before, you know, using that data to make sure that we are still achieving what we want to achieve, and maybe where we're not achieving what we want to achieve, how do we build on that? But also working with our partners, you know, getting feedback from them. What is working well? What's not working well? How can we work together to address those things? And then finally looking at the root cause of homelessness. So, you know, what is it that's got to this situation, and can we do anything about that, in the hope that it doesn't just provide a 6-month solution, but a much more long-term solution. So yeah, thank you very much all for listening. And yeah, that's kind of how we as a prevention service are sort of setting ourselves up, at least.
Thank you, Ailey. That was really interesting, and I can see that there's lots of questions coming into the Q&A to find out more. We're going to have to do the questions at the end of the panel just because of time, but we'll come back to those. Can I please introduce now from Anglesey, Sarah Jones and Lydia Jones.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think Lydia's going to share screen with you.
Sorry, I'm getting this. Lovely. Okay,
There
can
we
you all
go.
see that? Yeah.
Yeah, looks
Yeah.
good.
Lovely. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Sarah and I'm the Housing Options Assessment Team Leader. So I currently manage a team of 6 assessment officers who are the officers responsible for carrying out the homeless assessments and working with the statutory duties of the Act. So on Anglesey, we're obviously a much smaller authority than somewhere like Cardiff. And up until June this year, the officers have always worked on a mixed case under all of the duties. We've always worked on this model as a mixed caseload, with officers having a day of pre-booked appointments, so usually the 66 files, assessing walk-ins on a rota basis, and then having, for example, 1 file day. However, due to continued pressures on the team, we've decided to try a new approach. And having discussed and reviewed past yearly figures, we've decided since June this year that we've split the team in terms of the duties. So we currently have 3 officers dealing with the 66 prevention duty and 3 officers dealing with the 73 and 68 duties, and those who progress to a full Section 75 duty. As I said, we've been trialling it since June, and so far it seems to be going well. So the main advantages that we've noticed from this change in the way we work is that to begin with. It helps all the officers split their time more effectively between their caseload if they hold a similar caseload of cases. Additionally, we've noticed that it's led to improved communication, one within the team. So, for example, when we have meetings around temporary accommodation, we have less officers in that meeting, and therefore the meetings seem to be a lot more focused. But also we've had the feedback with third-party agencies that, you know, when they're supporting people in temporary accommodation, it's easier to identify, I need to go directly to that officer, and so it's working well in that sense. Another advantage is that we've been able to focus on staff professional strengths and expertise. And for example, we've got an officer that's got a law background and naturally enjoys working on legislation. So he's naturally one of the 66 officers and is quite informative in his advice on the cases to the clients. The main advantage, and I think one of the main reasons that we've identified the need for this change within the team, is to give us an opportunity to re-establish the focus on the prevention work. I think we'll all agree since COVID that we've been firefighting our cases and probably focusing on the cases in temporary accommodation. They're the ones that seem to display the most complexities when working with clients, and also probably, you know, the ones that we feel most pressure to move on due to cost and resources. So we noticed that due to these demands on the team, with staffing and cases high, that prevention work wasn't really taking a front in all of that. So by having this split, it's given us more time to focus on the prevention cases. We've been able to save recently a few more tenancies just because we've been able to maybe see them sooner, focus on the cases, get the referral in for the housing related support, and also, you know, examples like using our tenancy saver to clear the arrears and so forth, which have all added to the successes. Another contract that we've got in place that seems to be working well and obviously benefiting as a team is our shelter contract. So we're currently working with shelter on an ongoing contract where a shelter officer works for the authority for the benefit of the assessment team 2 days a week. This contract came into force in January this year and will run for a 2-year period. And it's the second contract we've undertaken with shelter in its current form. So the role of the shelter advisor is to work with the officers directly and not with the clients. And it's more of a advisory role with the officers. So it includes giving specific case advice on cases where the advisor feels some discussion or clarity is needed. And they also have one-to-one sessions, be it on a monthly or weekly basis. Shelter advisor also is able to arrange training courses for the team and delivers briefing sessions on particular aspects of the legislation when we feel it's needed and to meet the needs of the team. So, for example, recently, because of the increase in the Section 21s, we held a briefing session just so that all the officers had a bit of a refresher around the notices, you know, if you've paid the deposit and so forth. As well as that, the advisor is currently working with myself on a good practice guide around suitable offers. So this guide will ensure that our officers follow the correct procedure for any suitable offer they make, whilst using the newly created templates, letters that are going to be informative and also accessible to the client. As part of our work with shelter, we will also be looking at the Ombudsman report into reviews and implementing the recommendations. So what's been the advantages of the shelter contract for us is that to begin with, we are able to use the shelter contract to our advantage when we have new staff starting with us. So obviously, due to the legislation involved within the role, it does require a lot of reading and training on the Act for a new officer. Due to the ongoing contract, shelter are able to arrange tailored training for the new staff member along with the ongoing support. So we've recently had 6 months funding for the additional 6 posts just in order to deal with the Section 21 notices. So I was able to go to Michael, the shelter advisor that works with us, and ask him to arrange tailored 66 training for that officer to get them up and running as quickly as we can, as we've only got a 6-month window of them in post. Additionally to this, I think it helps in terms of staff development and increases the staff members' confidence. So the mentoring helps with that. I also think, you know, that when they go to Michael and discuss a specific case, sometimes it's just that they need to discuss their thought process and rationale for making a certain decision, and when they find it to be correct, you know, it naturally builds their confidence as officers. Again, as I mentioned, another benefit is, you know, having training sessions and briefing sessions when we need them, and the fact that Michael's able to help us keep abreast of legislation and keep us updated on changes in the law and useful cases. I'm going to pass you over to Lydia now, who will give you an overview of her role, which has been created as well within the time frame.
Hi. So I've got a lot of slides, I'm afraid, so I will try and whiz through them as fast as I can. So like Sarah said, my name is Lydia, and today I'm going to talk to you about my new role. The Housing Service identified the need to appoint new roles within the functioning of housing services in order to respond to homelessness and to work alongside existing HSG support providers and the housing assessment team. One of these roles was this role, the complex case coordinator. I've been in post since July 2021. Prior to this role, I was a homeless officer for the local authority in Anglesey for 18 months. And prior to that, I was the senior support worker for the Woolwich, which is a Housing First project on Anglesey. But I joined them from 2014 after completing my studies at Bangor University. My background has allowed me to step into the role with the knowledge and understanding what housing support grant work towards and how the local authority work within the homeless legislation and link them both together. On the slide, you'll see some of my role's responsibilities, but the main purpose of the role is to lead and coordinating support for clients in emergency accommodation. I have the overall responsibility for encouraging those in temporary accommodation to address poor behaviour and identify solutions at an early age in order to prevent clients losing their temporary accommodation. As stated previously, this is a housing support grant funded and is not a statutory role. There have been several changes to the homeless department since the role has been in place, which I will touch upon in greater detail. But those changes include changes to our triage form and how clients access the homeless department, referral into my new role, introducing a RAG system. We've also introduced a low, medium and high support needs matrix. We've developed a rapid response support plan. And as Sarah discussed, the changes to the homeless officer's role. I will discuss that further on the next slide, but just wanted to touch upon really the future for the complex case coordinators that we're looking at for a hub. So we're looking at gathering the key parties in to prevent and to stop people leaving temporary accommodation. And we feel a part of that hub, those need to be a rapid response officer, a move on officer, a Woolwich rapid response officer, a Woolwich stepping stones officer, which is a mental health lead need support worker, a mental health generic support worker, and we also think that the prison resettlement officer should be part of that hub. We feel the above, alongside the Council's vision, is to make homeless rare, brief and unrepeated, with prevention of homelessness being the primary focus is the link we need. Where prevention has not worked, rapid rehousing is seen as an essential to reduce the impact of homelessness and ensure it is unrepeated, and we believe the service really required to complete these are the ones that I've listed above. So I touched upon new things that we've adapted within the authority. So myself and the Housing Support Grant Review, Leslie Thomas, worked closely on developing 3 new processes within the homeless department. So the top left you can see is our homeless assessment form. So we made sure that this was more computer friendly, as pre-COVID it was all written. And we asked more open-ended questions. Training has also been given to all the officers in regards to asking questions in a PI format. The top right, we now have a safety plan, which again, we worked very closely with the head of PI operations and therapeutic services in the Woolwich in Cardiff to develop this and to adapt a better option rather than a risk assessment. As you can see, I don't know if you can see because it's so small, we discuss about triggers and how we can manage those triggers and how other people can support them to manage those triggers rather than the risk assessment being a tick box. And then lastly, we have on the bottom is the housing related support outcome support plan. So as I touched on before, we've developed a RAG, which is red, amber and green, and we've also developed a low, medium and high matrix. So what happens is when somebody presents to the homeless department, they're passed on to a rapid response officer. They will discuss what their needs are, book them into temporary accommodation, and then they will complete this support plan, and that will be passed on to our housing grant service. So that could be the Woolwich, for example. The Woolwich then will build on that support plan. So we're hoping it will give a smoother transaction so the clients don't need to repeat their story continuously. Just to go back really onto my role, this is the data conducted since the financial year of this year. So I touched on the RAG system previously, so it's quite self-explanatory really. So red, amber and green, red being the most chaotic cases and green being the lowest intervention needed. So there were 72 cases highlighted in between the financial year and today, and then 160 cases in amber and 78 cases in green. This means there's 385 cases being open within this financial year that has required a complex case coordinator advice or guidance. The work could include variable different things. It could be a home visit, it could be a referral to other places, it could be weekly MDTs, and often we find that it's daily MDTs due to behavioural issues in temporary accommodation. It's fundamental to my role that we work in partnership with key partners and stakeholders. We believe that working in partnership with service users and other stakeholders can enhance quality of life, maximum choices and ensure value for money. And lastly, I just wanted to touch upon the feedback that we've had the last couple of months since this complex case coordinator has been in post. This shows the impact it's having on the clients, but also on those that are working with the client. As a department, we want to stop the revolving door and we want our clients to live a happy and healthy life. We believe that this role will make a fundamental difference to people's lives for the better. If you have any questions, of course, you can put them in the Q&A box. Thank you.
Thank you both. Yes, there are questions coming through, but again, we're gonna do them at the end just so that we can get through everything. So now I'm going to pass over to I think as soon as we unshare the questions. Now then, Joy Williams and Angela Bowen from Carmarthenshire. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for bearing with us. Okay. So without sort of repeating what other colleagues have talked about already, I think along with all authorities in Wales, we are experiencing an unprecedented demand for housing, where the demand for affordable housing is exceeding supply, as Jenny pointed out at the start of the event today. So as an authority, I think we responded exceptionally well to Welsh Government's Everyone In approach and the recently No One Left Out. And we ensured we met our full obligations, widening our responsibilities to ensure that everybody had safe accommodation during the COVID period. What we identified, though, is the profile of excuse me, eligible individuals meant that there was also an unprecedented demand for single persons unit, and inevitably this resulted in growing numbers of people in temporary accommodation who, because of the challenges for them for move on and the growing numbers of people who we owe a full duty to, we've simply not been able to match the supply with the demand. So we carried out a review of the situation at that time. and what were the factors that were contributing to our homeless presentations and the demand for temporary accommodation. So one of the big issues I think we identified that for individuals approaching the service, there were no support needs assessment carried out at that first point of presentation. It was quite some time into the system before individuals were identified as having a support need and referred on to other agencies. We had an increase in number of people in temporary accommodation. The majority of those were single homeless. We didn't have the stock that matched to be able to move those individuals on, and they were spending a considerable period of time in temporary accommodation. The service was very reactive. We had at the time, I think, around 9 caseworkers with an average caseload of around 100 cases per officers. So not really having the time to proactively work with individuals to alleviate homelessness, and just responding to day-to-day crisis situation and homelessness presentation. Those growing numbers of presentations, the top 3 factors we identified was notice from landlords, parents no longer willing to accommodate, or relationship breakdown. And we're seeing on average, I'd say around 45 presentations a week with around 780 cases already in the system. The other thing we identified feedback from individuals was that the system is very difficult to navigate for applicants, not understanding the various different duties, not understanding the obligations on themselves, or what the authority is able to do to help them. And as that's been mentioned in previous presentation, the recommendations from the Ombudsman own initiative investigation, we fully took those on board as one of the 3 local authority areas that were party to the investigation. The recommendations were Wales-wide, but certainly with regard to our approach to applicants, and instilling that we should have a PIE approach and coming from a customer first perspective. So at the same time as carrying out the internal review, we were working corporately to develop the HSP strategy. And that was a piece of work carried out by our commissioning team, but quite wide-ranging consultation with partners and stakeholders in identifying the 3 strategic priorities. So the first one being preventing homelessness. And one of the things that we'd identified for the service and the customers was we didn't have a seamless service for homelessness prevention. Individuals were handed off from different agencies, different parts of the services. And as I said, it was difficult to navigate. We weren't offering any kind of early intervention offer with regard to prevention of homelessness. And there was an inability to empower people to maintain their accommodation because their support needs had not been identified early on in the process. And there was no ongoing support for people to maintain their accommodation to prevent their homelessness and that revolving door issue that we're all faced with. So the strategic priority 2 was having the right accommodation for people who do become homeless. And again, in order for us to identify what that accommodation should be, whether or not it's temporary accommodation, supported accommodation, or settled, we need to use the data from the support needs assessment. We've got an ongoing capital build programme, but clearly the face of homelessness has changed for us locally, and we're trying to shift that capital programme now to be more proactive towards meeting the needs of homelessness households not just the wider scope of delivering affordable homes. One of the biggest issues, as identified earlier, was the lack of single persons accommodation. So a priority for us is to explore options to create shared settled accommodation rather than waiting for lengthy periods of time of bringing online new one-bedroom properties. And a key factor for us, and it would be across Wales, is ensuring that landlords, private landlords, are able to offer accommodation options for individuals who are homeless or threatened with homeless. And part of that is ensuring that we provide that pre-tenancy support and ongoing support for tenants in the private rented sector to maintain their tenancies. And like all local authorities across Wales, we needed to develop a local rapid rehousing plan, and we did this via a partnership group. So it was a range again of stakeholders, partners, and we developed the plan through the joint planning and commissioning arrangements with those key partners. The third priority identified in the HSP strategy was having the right support for people who do become homeless. And again, this links back with ensuring the assessment of the support needs is carried out at that first point of contact. That will be maintained throughout the process. And in order for us to ensure that individuals receive the right level of support at the right time, it's important that we develop a housing support gateway service to ensure there is a consistent referral, assessment and delivery process. So there was a lot going on. We had increasing demands, we'd developed our strategic priorities, and there was a need to develop a rapid rehousing transition plan. And continuing to do more of the same was not an option at that point. Realistically, in order to deal with the demand, we would probably have had to have exceeded 30 caseworkers just to get the caseload down to a reasonable level. So we looked at developing a plan for a new service. So this was the initial service redesign back in May 22. Where we looked at the current funding for the service and the job profiles. We took on board the opportunity to bid for additional funding. We've utilised housing support grant, homelessness prevention grant, and no one left out. And the redesigned service for May 22 was to have a very sort of front-loaded housing advice and prevention team where we would triage all applications that came into the service, carry out a financial assessment, make sure that individuals are claiming what they're entitled to, try and maximise people's income, as well as trying to prevent their homelessness. The rapid rehousing team then developing the plan, creating the gateway team, but also having an in-house support team, that a referral mechanism from the early intervention at the advice and prevention team, but also throughout the process of the homelessness application. If people identified that applicants were struggling with the process, a referral can be made to that in-house support team. As per the recommendation of the Ombudsman report, we have an independent review and monitoring team looking at requests for reviews. That team is widened now into making direct allocations for people in the greatest need, making sure we match them to suitable houses and move them on as quickly as we can from temporary accommodation. The shift towards prevention means there will still be those very complex cases that end up in the final duty that need a complete wraparound multi-agency approach, and that's why the proposal was to create a complex case and partnership team. And finally, the pre-accommodation team provides wraparound support for people who have been nominated into either social housing tenancy or the private rented sector, maximising their income, making sure their direct debits are set up to pay their rent, making sure they access grants that they're entitled to move into and secure those tenancies. And following that, there were additional emerging factors then, which led us to a further redesign, which Joy will cover off now.
Thanks, Angie. So we developed and are continuing to develop the form of that team. As Angie says, we respond to those emerging factors, and you can see here the sort of the roles within each of these teams now as we go through. That front end team dealing with those initial calls, looking at the needs of individuals as they come through to the service, answering questions around housing register and other sort of basic housing information and advice, identifying further homelessness assistance that may be required, and signposting then or filtering people through to the next team. Oh, I think I might have got these. No, I haven't. Sorry. Then part of that team also then would pick up any cases in the first instance, looking at preventing homelessness wherever possible, providing temporary accommodation if necessary, and working with people in that first stage of the homelessness duty. We're developing this in-house support team that will be able to support new cases right through from application through to discharge of duty, working very closely with caseworkers to do that, utilising grant funding and other sources of funding to best bring the team together. Also there then looking, as Angie said, at the gateway, so referring on for further support or additional support, and having all of that through one doorway in a sense means that we can successfully monitor support provision and ensure that it's being provided to the right people in the right way. And lots of this sort of backs up the actions within our rapid housing plan around the redesign of the service and looking at how we better assist and support people. Then those complex cases where we need a multi-agency approach, we can manage some of that through that team as well, pulling together key partners to be able to support and rehouse people in the best way that we can. As Angie's already said, we've begun to direct match far more social housing. So we have an allocations team who are looking at best fit for allocations, so that we're able to discharge far more of our duties into the social renters sector, where perhaps the private rented has become more unaffordable and less accessible. We're making the most of our social housing in that way, and also ensuring that the quality of our provision is good. And then where households are cases are with us for long periods of time and move through to that Section 75 duty, or are more complex and require sort of intensive input, we've got this small team of caseworkers who can focus on delivering that support in a much more sort of tailored way for those individuals, and then supporting people into tenancies to settle in their own homes, and also looking more widely in engaging with partners around learning, training and development, so that partners are also skilled up in understanding when a homelessness duty may be triggered and how to refer people through and get the right help at the right time. So it's early days for us in the redesign of the service. Lots has happened in a short space of time, and I think we've kind of come a long way, really, even since the sort of the end of the pandemic. We've managed to increase capacity in the team through utilising funding in sort of the best ways. So a range of different funding streams are now used to fund that housing hub team. We're continuing to recruit to that team and fill vacancies within the support team, the pre-tenancy team. We're getting new caseworkers on board and trained. So there's lots going on in building capacity in that team. We're increasing the use of this direct matching through exceptional circumstances within our policy, our allocations policy at the moment, and that's proven very successful in discharging duties. And we've taken that work further through a cross-party task, scrutiny task and finish group to look at how we might reshape the allocations policy in an emergency situation to better make use of social housing for those in need. And that will be sort of developed, finalised and then monitored over a 12-month period to see whether that's made the differences that we'd hope for. So we've seen already that the changes that we've made have reduced sickness absence levels within the team and greatly increased morale and the sense of perhaps belonging, understanding their role, sorry, excuse me, their purpose, and their place in that team has grown with staff members feeling much more sort of included and useful within that team and within their role. So that's been a real positive sort of soft indicator of the change. A more sort of robust indicator is that our prevention reporting has greatly improved. Not that this was our sort of main focus or reason in a sense for delivering the changes, but it's been a really successful improvement that we've seen, that we've been able to sort of show hard evidence of what's working. We have a very strong supportive rapid rehousing partnership board now that oversees the delivery of that plan, which we are really sort of grateful for and engaging well with. And we're very much seeing the culture within the service changing and the perception of partners, both sort of external to the hub within the authority and external to the authority, very much changing in a positive way towards the service. So those are sort of some of the initial indicators that we've seen, and we hope as we move down this road to see sort of further positive improvements with the changes. Thank you. We'll leave it to Jenny to.
Fab. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. The three very different examples there, and we're going to bring everybody back now for Q&A. I think it's really interesting that we've got we had one large authority there, didn't we? We had a small authority, and then Carmarthenshire kind of sitting in between, and everybody in their own way taking a strategic approach. I don't know whether we're able to whether we can see everybody. Hopefully we can. Ailey, I was going to pick on you first, if you don't mind. Sorry, but there were a number of questions in the chat, particularly when you were speaking, around your PRS initiatives and what programs you've launched, if they're successful, what financial incentives you've got for landlords, what's your bond board like? So, and it would be good for everybody to say something about the PRS side of the work. But Ailey, if I could pick on you to start, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got 2 specific schemes aimed at landlords within Cardiff. So we've got the Welsh Government leasing scheme that we were part of the initial pilot for, and continuing to kind of work with landlords on that front. So that's we manage the property on behalf of the landlord. Rent is set at LHA rate, but it's guaranteed rent for that landlord. It's sort of continued support for the landlord throughout the tenancy and things like that. We also then have our Let's initiative, which is very recently launched, and that's slightly scaled back version of the leasing scheme. So it's not guaranteed rent. We're not fully managing the property, but we can do things like help that landlord get registered and licensed on Rent Smart Wales. We can do inspections of the property to make sure it's meeting the right standards, offering grant funding if it's not, to improve that property or to provide specific measures. Say if a young family are moving in, we can offer support to make the stairs safe for young children or provide locks on windows, things like that. We also offer sort of legal support, so for landlords maybe a bit concerned about the Renting Homes Act coming in, we can kind of hopefully offer a bit of sort of support to them in that sense. So those are kind of the schemes that we run. They're not extensively covered, but a bit of an idea of kind of what we can offer landlords. Again, we try not to kind of say this is everything we can offer, because sometimes a landlord will come to us and say, actually, I'm really struggling with this, can you help me? And we'll always do our best to support them in that sense, and offer that support throughout tenancy as well, regardless of which scheme they sign up for. And just to quickly touch on the bonds, so we do have a number of kind of financial incentives for landlords and tenants. So one of those is the bond and the first month's rent. That can be paid in a number of ways. So it's either paid via DHP if they qualify for DHP because of existing universal credit housing benefit payments. It can be paid using the housing support grant, or if the person's a worker and has maybe a lot of expendable income each month but not anything saved, we can also pay via the moving cost loan in partnership with the credit union. So we would pay up front and then they would pay it back with the to the credit union, who then set up a savings account with them and help them sort of start saving some money as well. We also offer a rent rescue kind of package, and I know you're going to be talking about that in a lot more detail later on, for private tenants and social tenants, and we're looking at other packages such as maybe a rental top-up or extra bond or a rent guarantee scheme as well. As properties are coming harder and harder to come by, we're trying to utilise the funding that we've got to overcome those barriers.
Well, thanks, Ailey. I'm going to see if I can bring everyone else on now. Does anyone else want to pick up this point about PRS and supporting PRS landlords?
Yeah, Jenny, I can sort of give a picture where we are in Carmarthenshire. So we have our own in-house social lettings agency. So we offer a number of different packages to landlords, where it can just be a basic, you know, find a tenant type of arrangement, through to the full management and repair obligations. So we've got various different packages. They come with various different guarantees of rent or not, with the expectation that the tenants would be there with the local housing allowance rate. So we don't tend to offer above that. Also, through our sort of homelessness prevention, we will look at the bonds, rent in advance, etc. And we tend to do individual spend to save applications. So rather than having a prescribe, this is all you can have, it'll vary dependent on how difficult it would be to house that individual, or what the anticipated temporary accommodation costs would be if we didn't make such arrangements. And also we're expanding now our pre-accommodation team to increase the staff in there. So we'll have a dedicated support team working both with tenants and landlords, either entering the private rented sector or exiting, and trying to prevent such loss of accommodation. whether or not it's antisocial behaviour or rent arrears or other factors, if there's an issue around mediation, etc. So we've got that added service as well.
Thank you. I'm slightly conscious of time, and we're going to be running ahead a little bit. We've had some thanks to all the speakers in the Q&A. If I could just ask you one more question before we go to the break. I was really interested in the direct matching that you talked about in Carmarthenshire through the exceptional circumstances on the allocations policy. That feels like a really important part of all of this, doesn't it, for people who are in TA, especially long term. And so I wondered what other partners thought as well about, how have we managed to make allocations more flexible during this time, so that we can get that move on from TA happening. I don't know who wants to pick that one up.
We obviously have our own stock here on Anglesey, and also the social landlords have stock. We obviously do work to the housing allocation policy, but because we hold our own stock in some instances, we are able to maybe make a direct allocation outside of the housing allocation policy. And I think what benefits the team is because we have our own stock and we have dedicated solutions officers that work on that stock. We do find out from those staff members if there are difficult to let properties or properties where they can reduce the age, if there's a 2-bedroom that they can't fill, and we can work with the officers directly to see if we do have any specific cases in temporary accommodation, or the 66 cases that we can match them to and get an allocation sorted that way through the allocations without, it's not being done directly, but it's just working closely together, if that makes sense.
Yes, and partnership working and being flexible as well. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. And we've run out of time for this session, but that was so useful. And just to answer people's questions in the chat, this is going to be on the YouTube channel from next week, so you'll be able to see all of the slides there when we get that up. Thank you so much, panelists. We're going to go for a short break now, 5 minutes. Okay, so could we come back please at 2 to 3, and we're going to crack on with the next session. Okay, diolch pawb. Okay, croeso nôl. Welcome back, everybody. Right, we're going to go into our next session now, which is about something which we've started to explore a bit over the last couple of months. And I know, as well as you've already heard in this webinar, local authorities have been exploring it too, some more than others. It's the idea of rent rescue and mortgage rescue as a tool to help people to remain in their home. So what do we mean by this? We mean when a social landlord either partly or fully buys a property with the residents still in place, with the idea of keeping them on as tenants or part owners. I had a very vivid reminder about how impactful this can be last week at the TPAS conference in Llandrindod. I was talking to a social tenant, and she had gone through a mortgage rescue back in 2009, and Shelter Cymru had helped her through it, and she had great things to say about how we'd managed to support her during that time. But she's still in her home now. So that was back in 2009, and she is a happy and secure social tenant. And it just reminded me again how life-changing that can be as an intervention. That was a good 10 years ago that we were investing in mortgage rescue. So that's what we're going to be focusing on for the remainder of this session today. But before we go on, I'm going to have another go at doing some voting. Okay, so if you just bear with me while I get my slides up. There we go. So we just wanted to take the temperature in the room here. Okay, so have your phones at the ready again, and we're going to be asking you, to what extent have well, this is mainly aimed, I should say, at those of you who are in the room who are you're either frontline service staff or social landlords in the room. Okay, to what extent have you used mortgage rescue as a tool to prevent homelessness? Okay, either now or in the past, or else you've never heard of it before today, that's fine as well as an answer. So if you can see on the screen, there we are. Let's get those votes coming in. Feel like a TV presenter or something with this, or announcing the election results or something. It's all very exciting. Okay, so we'll just give it a minute more because I can see things are coming in. It's really interesting actually to see how many haven't heard of this before today. It's really interesting. So it's looking to me as though, oh no, we've lost it. Oh, that's my fault. Press the button. There we go. So never heard of it before today, more than half. Great. Well, let's spend a bit of time enlightening you. Used in the past about a third, and interestingly, just over 10% are using it now. Okay, great. Really interesting. So that's the picture for mortgage rescue. Okay, I'm going to ask you the same question now, but for rent rescue. So this is specifically in those cases where a private landlord is selling up, the tenants are being have had a no fault eviction to get vacant possession, and the local authority stepped in and bought the property from the landlord with a view to keeping the tenants in situ. Okay, so hopefully that should have gone over onto your phones now, and if you can let us know what your thoughts are on this question. And it wouldn't be surprising to see most people perhaps not having heard of it, because it's a pretty new idea. At least it's new as far as I'm concerned, and I've been in this game a while now. Okay, so interesting temperature gauge here. We've got about 2/3 in the room who haven't heard of this as an intervention. So yeah, keep the votes coming in, and as I say, we'll keep these votes and the results of the polling, and we'll share them on socials. So thank you very much for that. So again, about 12% have used it in the past. About a quarter are using it now, and that's fascinating, because I think there's a lot of this happening under the radar at the moment, or local authorities kind of quietly experimenting here and there, and yeah, a pretty large majority, about 2/3, who haven't heard of it before today. So okay, great stuff. Thank you, everybody. Stop sharing. And at this point, I'm now going to hand over to Wendy Dearden. So Wendy, for those of you who don't know her, Wendy is she's had a long history in the Welsh housing and homelessness sector, and she is, I'm happy to say, our policy and public affairs manager at Shelter Cymru. And I'm going to make myself disappear, and Wendy is going to take over this bit.
And she's still bragging about getting the chocolate digestives right. So I won the bet on the which biscuit was going to be everybody's favourite. I'm kind of kicking off the session here by just giving a little bit of a background. And in some ways, it makes my life easier that there is a lot of people in the room who haven't heard about rent and mortgage rescue. So I'm not going to be the main speaker here. We're not going to do presentations, because that kind of makes things even more complicated from a techie point of view. So other people that will be joining me in this conversation, and I'm going to give you all their job titles because they won't be bringing them up on screen as part of their presentation. We've got Catherine Roberts, who's going to pop up. She's the Affordable Homes Manager at Group Cynefin. Her colleague, Shauna Griffiths, Senior Affordable Homes Officer at Group Cynefin, is going to pop up as well. And then we've got Susan Mazoon, who is the Director of Housing Services at Clwyd Allen. And last but not least, James Hooker from Welsh Government. He's the Head of Private Sector Housing Policy. Now, I have to give James a bit of an apology that apart from him, this is turning into a bit of a North Walian fest, which is quite unusual for a national webinar like this. So the North Walians are definitely flying the flag this afternoon. Either that, or I've just called in a few favours and asked people to come and talk to you about this with me. So a very brief background from me. Back in September, so I think in my second day at Shelter Cymru, we had a meeting around rent rescue, and the organisation had been starting to explore models for keeping people who were facing homelessness actually in their own homes. At that time, it was very much us talking about private sector tenants who were seeing their tenancies being brought to an end because of the landlord saying it's time for me to sell up. As a backdrop for the non-frontline people in the room who are the ones living and breathing this at the moment, we're seeing unprecedented levels of landlord possessions at the moment, and our caseload on no-fault evictions as Shelter Cymru has increased about 114% since last year. So it's a really big thing. We know that landlords are worried about the legislative change around renting homes Wales. And there's also the other stuff going on in the market, like converting their properties to be holiday lets. And there's all sorts of things going on, which makes the private renter sector quite a volatile place at the moment. And then added to that, we've got all the stuff going on about mortgage interest rates, both for landlords, but also for owner-occupiers as well. So that's then made us think about what needs to be put in place around owner-occupiers and mortgage repossessions. So I think I heard speaking to somebody last week that if you come out of a 5-year fix at the moment, you're looking at paying an extra £250 to £300 a month on your mortgage bill. So it's a bit of a ticking time bomb, really, it feels. We're starting to see a gradual increase in numbers of people coming to us with concerns about mortgage arrears, but it really feels like one to watch at the moment. So instead of just talking about what's happening, we wanted to start thinking about some of the solutions and things that could be put in place. So we're going to start with mortgage rescue, because that's actually not a new thing. So it's quite interesting that quite a few people in the room have not heard about it. In 2008, a dedicated funding pot of about 5 million was made available by Welsh Government. That was around the time of the height of the credit crunch, and it was all around helping homeowners to stay in their own properties. And it was capital funding, and the idea was that a housing association would be able to either fully buy or part buy that property, enabling the household to remain where they are, but the tenure of the property to shift. Rather than the people having to change tenure, the house would change tenure, is the way that I kind of think about it. Assistance could vary in terms of the proportion of the property that was bought. So people could be a full social renter going forward, or it could be a shared ownership or home buy model. We're going to be very careful when we're talking about things here, because certainly the ladies from Group Cynefin, we can get quite techie about all this sort of stuff in terms of what happens around shares of properties and that sort of thing. So we're going to try and avoid the technical language a little bit. So mortgage rescue has been around as a tool for quite a number of years, but it was very much my feeling that perhaps it isn't used or known about. What happened when the dedicated funding pot stopped is that some local authorities did continue it with some partner housing associations, and that was certainly the case with Group Cynefin in North Wales. Now, what I would like to do now is pass you over to Catrin, and Catrin's going to talk a little bit about how Group Cynefin work with local authorities and the referral process, and some of the things to think around mortgage rescue. She's then going to pass you then on to Sioned, who's actually going to talk us through a practical case study of a real household who have been assisted through this model. So by the wonders of technology, somebody's going to make me disappear, and Catrin's going to pop up with her lovely Group Cynefin background. Are you there, Catrin?
I am, yes, thank you very much. Brilliant, so thank you very much, Wendy. Yes, as mentioned, I work for Group Cynefin Housing Association, and we cover the 6 local authorities in the north, as well as we work in parts of Powys as well. So we've been administrating the mortgage rescue scheme on behalf of the local authorities for some time, and usually in a year we would have about 1 or 2 at the most to consider. So the process that we have is, we've currently reviewed with 3 local authorities and wanting to review with the additional 3, is that it starts with the homeless team within the local authorities. They would then complete an assessment and a referral on the applicant to see if they're in need of the mortgage rescue scheme, or are there any other factors that could be considered to address the housing need or the housing issue at the time. So once the referral's been completed and they have been identified as wanting a service, the officers would then have to just check with their strategic unit or whoever is responsible for the funding pot, because it used to be funded by social housing grant. At the moment, it's been funded by the recycled capital grant from Welsh Government. We would require funding for this scheme because we need to either buy the house or buy parts of the house depending on the applicant's situation. So when the funding and the referral's been confirmed, they would send them over to one of our officers, and then we would then take them through the process of the financial assessment and to support them by making sure that relevant parties were involved, such as Shelter and CAB, because the important thing here is to make sure in the beginning that the mortgage has been frozen and they're not receiving any more sort of interest on the payments that haven't been paid. And that we confirm to the bank that we are looking at the process. It isn't a very quick process because of what is required. So we would look at all the options for following their financial assessment. So would we be in a position to buy back and rent the home back to them? Could we consider shared ownership where they would pay rent on part and we would buy the other percentage, or could we do a home buy scheme on the property? The rent is the most complicated one because obviously we have to conform with Welsh Government standards in regards to the property with size, etc. So it's also always easier to go for the shared ownership or home buy scheme if possible. And then during this process, we would always keep the applicants informed because it is a very stressful time for them, and we do try and you know, keep them informed and advise them on what's going on to make sure that they're sort of kept in the loop, because at the end of the day they might be renting a property they used to live in, and sometimes that's quite hard. The transition is quite hard for the individuals. So we do try and look at the shared ownership or the home buy scheme as an option. With the home buy scheme, in time they can pay us back when things change, and hopefully they do change and their situation will improve, so then they will be their own homeowner again if they're able to pay the percentage back to us. So in a nutshell, I've just gone, I'm quite conscious of time, so I've just given you some information on the process itself. And Sioned, one of the officers that works in the team, who is quite experienced with home buy and who has taken many applicants through the process, is just going to give you a quick case study so that you can see how it has changed the lives of an individual. Diolch, Sioned.
Hi. Right, I'm just going to take you through one of our recent applications that we've gone through in Grove Cynefin. We received the referral from Anglesey County Council for the mortgage rescue. They had interviewed the applicants and had checked with the strategic department that there was funding available for these applicants to be assisted through the mortgage rescue scheme. This applicant was a retirement age, and the property had been adapted to an extent for her use. So the first step we do when we receive the referral from the council, we send them an application form in the post or through email. And then they fill all the details in, so the name, address, national insurance number, income, expenditure, the amount of the outstanding mortgage, and an estimated value of the property. So when we receive all that information and proof of the mortgage statement, etc., and the bank statement, we assess then briefly which scheme that would help this applicant, i.e., as Country mentioned, the home buy scheme, where we can purchase between 30 and 50% of the property value. This then could be used to repay the mortgage and the outstanding debts. Depends on the value of the property and the outstanding debt if this scheme would work. But with this one, the current owner of the property remains as a part owner, so like a shared equity scheme. So they remain as the owner of the property, and they would be still liable for the maintenance of that property. the association would then have a charge on this house. So depending on the percentage we purchase, we would then have a charge on the property for the future. If the home buy is not an option, then we would look at the shared ownership scheme, where again, we would look at the value of the property and the amount of the outstanding debt. And then we can purchase up to 75% of the property value with this scheme, with the current owner still owing the remaining percentage. With the shared ownership scheme, the owner then would become a leaseholder, and they would be paying rent to the association for the percentage that we own of that property. And then the final scheme we would look at is the rent. So if either of the home buy or the shared equity wouldn't work financially, we would look at purchasing the whole property, and the owner then would become our tenant. Again, we would look at the value of the property and the outstanding debt, but we would also require the development officer from the association to go out and assess the property and work an estimated cost of the work required to that property to bring it up to the Welsh Housing Quality Standard and the DQR that the association has to meet for the tenants to be able to live safely in that property. So once we received all the estimates in from the developments officer, we would look then with the acceptable cost guidance from the Welsh Government if that scheme would work out financially for us to be able to purchase it, renovate it, and then that the owner becoming our tenant for security in the future. After completing the assessments, to see which scheme would suit the case, we would then, as I said, keep in touch with the owner at all times and make them an offer which scheme we think would work better for them, and would they be happy to proceed. And then we would instruct the valuer to go out just to clarify the actual value of the property before we proceed further then and make the application to the Welsh Government for the funding. With the case, specific case we did last on Anglesey, the shared ownership scheme fitted the criteria, and now the owner has become our tenant and a leaseholder on this property and still living there happily and paying rent to us as the association. Thank you.
I think it's back to me now at that point. Thank you, Sinead. It's always good to have a real life example to talk through something that's actually quite complex, and it may be because of the complexity of it that it's something that doesn't get done that much, but we've used it very much as a starting point. We've used it very much as a starting point. I'm on screen now. I'm getting things popping up at me, but we're there now. We're using it very much as a starting point for how we can save tenancies and mortgages, keeping people in properties through purchasing in this way. So I'm just going back to my notes a moment. We were then starting to think about this model as a way for private sector landlords to potentially sell properties onto social landlords with tenants in situ, thinking about the number of Section 21 notices which are being served. We can tell from the Slido results we did, and also Ailey mentioned it a moment ago, that this is something that does seem to be happening at a small scale across Wales. But as Jenny said, a little bit kind of under the radar, and we think that it's really good practice that could be built upon. We seem to be under the impression at the moment it's used perhaps where there's been adaptations made to a property, perhaps grant funded by the local authority, and those adaptations would be lost if the property was sold on, and even worse than that, perhaps they'd have to be put in again into another property for the family. Also for large families or other households where it'd be really difficult to find alternative accommodation for them within the local area. Now, I know that one of the associations that have done a little bit of work on this is Clwyd Allen, who are just in the very earliest stages of exploring how this might work and if they would get involved with this. So I think Suzanne is there. I haven't actually seen her face yet, but I can see her name. Hello, Suzanne is there. So Suzanne is just going to talk to us a little bit about the thinking that Clwyd Allen are having around taking properties on in this way, particularly with tenants in situ, which is something a little bit different to kind of building new build properties.
Yeah. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Suzanne Mazzone. I'm the Exec Director of Housing at Clwyd Allen, and similar to Group Cynefin, we work across 7 local authority areas in North Wales. And in terms of sort of looking at this, it's come up from conversations that we've had with lots of local authorities about the current crisis of homelessness across housing solutions, housing options teams. My previous role was as a homeless and supporting people manager within a local authority, and I left just over 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. So I really don't envy colleagues who have been working through the pandemic and the crisis and the unprecedented times that we face at the moment in terms of homelessness and rising applications on the housing register. So what we started doing was talking around, as a social landlord, what can we do to help local authorities? We've already been taking 50% nominations, providing details of all of our voids, but obviously a lot of what we might have as void doesn't necessarily suit who you've got in temporary accommodation or who you've got on the housing register. So that matching process, and again, it always involves uprooting people and people needing to move. And then you've got an eye on the future as well, and actually the pressures on people at the moment. So there is financial support available for people that are on benefits. I'm not saying that's a total package and isn't it great, it's just there is some financial support out there for people. But when you start to look at those people, the squeezed middle, the people, you know, young families, working couples, rising costs of mortgage rates, it's kind of another pandemic waiting to happen really in terms of mortgages, owner occupiers and where it's going. And really as a social landlord, what we wanted to do was have a look to the future, and can we start to do things now that maybe would prevent further pressures on our homeless colleagues as we start to navigate through what we're working with at the moment. So as part of that, I started looking at, you know, what mortgage rescue schemes were out there, and as Captain mentions, there's a recycle grant, and there is some limited access to that, but it happens quite sporadically, and we do get approach from people as well to see if we can help them. So there is a model in Scotland, which is the Homeowners Support Fund, and that's quite similar in that it's a mortgage to shared equity, or it's a mortgage to rent, and alongside actually purchasing the property, then the Scottish Government provides some funding there which would help to bring the property up to the standard required for renting. So obviously in Wales, we've got the WHQS standards that we would need to make sure we go in and do. So it was looking along that model, and actually what the financial viability would be for us to purchase the property if we could draw down on some funds to actually make that work and keep people in the homes that they're in now, whether that be as a full housing association tenant or whether it be as a shared owner, depending on the equity that was in the property. And then we've been doing some work recently as well around the transitional accommodation capital programme, where again now we can apply through that via referrals from local authorities. We can apply to that fund for 80% capital to actually purchase a house for somebody who is threatened with homelessness. And for us, that's in terms of financial viability, that's a viable model. But I suppose where we want to get to is getting involved maybe a lot sooner, so that there's not those added pressures on the homeless teams, and that maybe there's some kind of direct referral route that we could do, whether that be through TITEG and as managing that through the Affordable Homes Register. then to prevent some of that sort of need for the homeless teams to have the additional pressure of potentially what's going to come in the future, because quite frankly, there's enough going on for everybody at the moment. So I suppose I think the transitional accommodation programme is a great option, and whether we could blend the two really between the sort of model that's in Scotland and the model that we're doing now around that, to see how we get to a solution that doesn't put added pressure on homeless teams, but also speeds up the process so that we can let people feel secure in their own homes as quickly as possible. And then the other work that we can do then is focus on other sort of crisis interventions that we can do, because you know we can build. We've got an ambitious development programme. We've got 600 properties on site at the moment and another 400 planned. But that's not going to get your people out of temporary accommodation in the next couple of weeks. So, and prevent more and more coming and presenting as homeless at your housing solutions team. So we're just looking at all of the different options. I'm more than happy to speak to people who've tried things, who've run different ideas to see if we can get that blend right. But I do think, as well as Catherine mentioned around the WHQS standards and things, there does need to be some kind of cooperation as well from Welsh Government around those standards, where we've got people who are living in those properties at the moment, that we don't put too many hurdles in the way for us to be able to do this and to be able to take the property on as a social landlord. So we need to try and get over some of those barriers, clearly making sure that the house complies with fitness for human habitation, but we need to find ways that we can do things quickly, and I suppose be realistic about alternatives. If we don't go ahead and purchase it, then what is the alternative and what is the cost, and do we maybe have a longer period of time where we can bring the house up to the WHQS standards? So lots of ideas that we're looking at and working through, and obviously we want to do it quite quickly because the crisis continues, and we need to find ways that we can help our partner local authorities as much as we possibly can. That's me. Thanks, Wendy.
I'm popping up now. I'm just going to get my video going. There we go. Press all the buttons before I start talking this time around, and then we know what we're doing. It's a really exciting opportunity. I think when we start talking about it, we kind of think about the barriers, and it'd be really good to kind of be able to break some of those down. And I'm sure there'll be some stuff in the Q&A around the different things that need to be thought about. We're generally in Shelter Cymru thinking about the use of acquisition, so buying existing properties more generally to help with housing supply. We focus very much on new build, and that will give us the numbers, but it won't give us the numbers instantly, and we kind of need those properties now. So there's a lot of work that can be done working with private sector landlords, empty homes, all that sort of element of work, looking at the existing housing stock and how it can help with the supply crisis. At this point, I'm going to bring James, I'm going to say into the room, but he's been lurking in the background for a while. That makes you sound like a lurker, James, but I didn't mean it in that way, no more than anybody else. The idea is, I'm not sure how much James can actually talk about our ideas around rent and mortgage rescue, but just more generally about the support that is available and being made available by Welsh Government for private sector tenants at the moment. So I'm going to press my mute and stop video again for a moment and leave you to have your moment, James.
Thanks, Wendy, and no need to apologise about me being the South Walian contingent. I spent a lot of time in Llangefni and Llandudno Junction working over the years, so I see myself as an honorary North Walian anyway from my time up there.
Absolutely, we'll accept you.
I think a lot of people have probably touched on some of the things I'm going to talk about, and have probably done it a lot better service than possibly I'm going to be able to. But I think you know, it's the support we've got available in the immediate term through our discretionary housing prevention fund, so the extra £6 million that we've put in there that's available for local authorities to tackle some immediate concerns around rent arrears, or providing support to provide bonds or rental guarantees to ensure people can stay in private rental sector properties and making use of that. And it sounds like everybody is, from me lurking in the background and listening in on previous speakers. I think, as Suzanne alluded to just then, we have launched the Transitional Accommodation Capital Programme, TACP, not TCP, as a lot of people seem to get tripped up with. This is a £65 million capital programme. We're looking to bring more than 1,000 additional homes on in the next 18 months. Almost half of those homes will be long-term or permanent homes, and the remainder are going to be offering good quality homes for use by individuals and families for a number of years. So I think that's sort of picking up some of the points Suzanne was making around where we may have, issues around some of the rental stock not quite fitting with WHQS, and is there a way that they can be improved over a few years, period, and looking at it a little bit more flexibly over that sort of period of time. I think the other thing to just note is more than 400 of those of these, target of 1,000 are actually empty homes as well. So again, very much looking at how we increase some of the supply to try and help with the move out of temporary accommodation, but also recognising that there's the growing need and urgency around the risk of evictions and homelessness presentations from tenants in the private rental sector. I think, as was mentioned in the first session earlier, we've also got Leasing Scheme Wales. So we've committed £30 million over the next 5 years for Leasing Scheme Wales. And the objective of this programme is to secure over 1,500 private rental properties into local authority control and management to provide longer term affordable accommodation. And as been mentioned, these would be local housing allowance rates, and there are grants available to improve the properties. I think the interesting thing coming from Leasing Scheme Wales at the moment is that actually over 75% of those properties are empty homes that have been in need of improvements and renovations to bring them back into use. So it's actually looking at increasing supply as well. However, I think, the one thing to flag is at the moment we've got 15 out of 22 local authorities signed up to Leasing Scheme Wales. We're very keen for the other authorities to come on board as well and work with us, because we're looking at ways that we can expand Leasing Scheme into other areas such as HMOs, very much recognising some of the challenges being faced around single family households in temporary accommodation, and how you need to look at providing opportunities there as well. So really, I think it was just, a quick trot through those areas, and really just to say thank you to Shelter Cymru for facilitating the webinar. I think, this ability to share best practice and talk about these opportunities and learning from each other is very much key to how we're going to sort of tackle this going forward. And I very much, would welcome any sort of input from people on the front line about what you think could work or may not work, as we look at what interventions we can bring forward going forward as well. So thank you.
That's fantastic, James. Thank you. I know you have volunteered at very short notice, so thank you for popping in and seeing us as we can do in this virtual world. And thank you to everybody else. We've got some real experts in the room, particularly in terms of Group Cynefin and mortgage rescue. I'm going to hand over to Jenny now. We're going to press all the buttons in the background, and she's going to do a mop-up of the Q&As, and might even end with another poll, who knows.
We do have one more poll in our back pocket, which I'll bring out in just a minute. But thank you, everyone. This is just such an interesting area. There's such a lot of potential, and I think whenever we look at all the different ways that we've got at our disposal for growing social housing, especially while house building is so challenging for us, this really feels like an area where we should be chucking our resources and doing what we can. I think all of the speakers should be coming and joining me now, all of the rest of the panelists, and we've got there's a question in the Q&A that I'm going to put to people, and there's some other questions that I got in my mind as well, but But first of all, there's a question here about mortgage rescue available to those in custody. So is there any, are there any examples where mortgage rescue has been available for people who are in custody, so that we can help homeowners to hang on to their homes if they go into custody? Has anyone got anything on that?
To date, we haven't had an application through the local authority for somebody who's in custody. But all I would say is they should refer themselves to the homeless team for an assessment, because they would then have to go through the criteria of being in need for a mortgage rescue scheme. And it would totally depend on their situation, their financial situation, the current situation of the house that they currently own. Does somebody currently live in that house? Is it their house? Has it been adapted? So I wouldn't be able to say a yes or no question, because each case would have to be assessed on its own merit and then referred on for consideration if they meet the criteria.
Thanks, Catherine. That's really useful. There's not a huge amount of questions coming through on the Q&A at this point. If you've got other questions that you want to ask, audience, please do stick them in there. In the meantime, there was a point that I've been chewing over about scalability. If I was a member of the public and listening to this, I might be getting a bit excited and thinking this is potentially a really brilliant safety net to have in place if I was a private renter, or if I was a homeowner, and if I was worried about losing my home potentially, that this might be an option. But is it worth saying something about scale here, and also scalability as well? If things are small at the moment, do they always have to be small, or how big could we go?
Shall I come in?
Great.
Yeah, it is an issue, because obviously, we've potentially got TACP funding. I always call it TCAP as well, get the letters wrong around. TACP funding at the moment, but that is a limited pot, and it has, it's a very generous pot, but that it's not ever-ending money. So, and the other issue as well is as a landlord, about, does it make sense for us to purchase that property? And that's not just in a financial way, but also in a housing management way. So have we actually got housing officers in that area? So what we're doing is working with other social landlords. So potentially, somebody approached us from a certain village, and Group Cynefin had homes there. It might make more sense for the landlord to be Group Cynefin in that situation. So we have to balance out as well the process of what we're going through, the size of the work involved with it, and actually how we're going to manage that property at the end of it. It doesn't mean that everybody across Wales who's got a mortgage has got a safety net. There does need to be that element of financial viability in it, and it does need to be where we are preventing, I suppose, that property being repossessed and those people presenting themselves at homeless teams, and the follow-on that comes out from that. And as well, the first option is always going to be, can we support those people to keep that property for themselves? So it's that network of, are we at the end of the line, or is there something else that can be done first? Because where possible, you want to protect their asset for them, don't you? And not just a housing association swoop in and think, oh, we can get this really cheap. That's not the idea. We want to keep people in their own homes in the best way for them. And most of that time, that would be resolving debt issues and looking at all that wraparound support services that would come with that, and funding those services as well. Before, the last resort would be, wouldn't it, a mortgage rescue?
Could I just add as well, and I think Susanne mentioned it before, it's such hard work to get all the documents ready to go to Welsh Government under a stressful sort of period of time. But in addition to that, we can't get the properties, maybe rent is the only option available, because they can't go on a shared ownership or a home buy scheme. But if that property doesn't meet the standards as they lie now with social housing, then we would have to say no, that we couldn't proceed with the mortgage rescue. And I think that's a big issue. And I know Suzanne mentioned it before. And if it is a mortgage rescue scheme and it helps somebody from to stay in their own home, not become homeless, obviously we do ask our welfare staff to go in and do a bit of financial workings out with them for future references as well. But if it doesn't fit the standards, then we've got to say no, which is awful, because we know then that the house is going to be repossessed, they're going to be homeless, and they're going to be an additional family or a family unit then on the local authority who are already under pressure, really. So maybe this scheme should be given some sort of flexibility under this sort of umbrella, really.
What do other people think about that point about flexibility? I mean, standards is always going to be tricky, isn't it? But should we be more flexible when it comes to standards, do you think?
Hi Jenny, I'm happy to come in on this, and apologies, for some reason I can't get my camera working, so I hope people can hear me. I don't quite know what's happened with the camera. I think we do need a degree of pragmatism given the cost of living crisis that we're facing. And I think, whilst if it was a new build property, clearly, WHQS needs to be there and needs to be followed. This isn't, that sort of situation. And given the crisis that we're facing, we do need to be probably pragmatic, but recognizing that we ideally want to be in a position where improvements are able to be made over a longer term period. But, from the 1st of December now, fitness for human habitation requirements are coming into the private rented sector. That will hopefully drive up the quality of accommodation there in terms of some of those issues that may have been in place in the past. But, I think the challenge, as you say, is how, and I think it was raised by Suzanne, is sort of very much how do we look at a more managed program, but also understanding earlier when interventions may be needed, rather than it becoming very much 11th hour and it's because tenants are presenting at the door of local authorities saying, I'm now going to be made homeless. So I think, as well as the sort of quality standards, it's also how do we probably work more collectively across the piece around how do we get some earlier, engagement and intervention around it as well. So it isn't, an 11th hour sort of firefighting situation, that we're trying to actually, manage it a bit more.
Sorry, Jenny, when I say standards, I don't mean that we would accept houses in great disrepair, because obviously we would be able to upgrade them properties with the grant funding. Sometimes it's just the size standards of the house. It's like a 2-bed 4-person house, but maybe that house is only a 2-bed 3-person, and because you can't, and it's so tricky with, it has to have a bed, it has to have a wardrobe when you design it, and it's that brings it a little bit more tricky. Obviously, if they needed a new kitchen, new bathroom, that's easily rectified, that's no issue, you'd put that in your application, but you can't extend the sizes of the rooms. And what people are saying is, well, I'm living here now, it is okay for me. That house is better for them and they've lived there for all their time. It might be a little bit on the small side, but they're not homeless.
And I think exactly, Catherine, that's the flexibility is that, that's needed there. Yeah.
Great, thank you, everyone. And I think there's a really important point there about things not getting to that late stage, and that's been a big takeaway for me from this discussion. And JJ's put a comment in the Q&A to that effect as well. Back about 10 years ago, when we were last seeing high numbers of mortgage possessions, we played a key role in many parts of Wales to try to avoid possession in court proceedings, liaising over with RSLs over mortgage rescues where those possession cases were unavoidable. I know we've got some mortgage provider delegates in the conversation today, which I think is really positive. And I'm really interested in seeing what conversations we can have about prevention from that sector as well, you know, getting upstream. But, you know, this conversation today, this webinar has been about all stages of the process, hasn't it? From the very early stuff to the firefighting and what can be done at that end as well. Can I just say a huge thank you to all of the panelists. It's been super interesting. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Lots of ideas for how we can take all of this forward. I hope it's been interesting to you as participants. I'm going to finish off with one final poll, if you'll indulge me. So let me share my screen. We've got one more wonderful Slido to do. So let me just pull it up. And again, we're going to be returning to the word cloud. So what would have the greatest impact in preventing homelessness this winter? So bearing in mind what you've heard so far in the presentations, we talked at the very beginning about what the biggest challenges were around lack of accommodation was massive, front and center with all of that. So what do you think would have the greatest impact this winter? And here's your slide again. If you've lost it on your phone, you can scan it again in the top left there. Try and keep it within you know, as few words as possible, just to be kind to the word cloud. But go for it. I'm looking forward to hearing what thoughts you have. Oh, coming in thick and fast. Interesting. Same emergency measures as COVID from the Welsh Government. I think this is a really interesting one, especially when we've been talking about a winter evictions moratorium potentially as something which would really help us, particularly when so many Section 21s are coming through. Partnership working has come through as a really strong theme today as well. No evictions in winter like France. Again, there we are. That's a message to take back to the Welsh Government. And increasing local housing allowance. Yeah, absolutely. But the biggest one here is financial support. Now, is that financial support to people in homes, or is that financial support to the sector to be able to provide, or both? Yeah. And I think the point about partnership working has been made really strongly today as well. Great. Thanks everybody for this. Yeah, Cap Rents, that was in there as well. UBI, I'm glad we got some really big thinkers in this group today. And the phosphate issue as well for Natural Resources Wales to sort their act out around that. Yep, that would help too. Fantastic. Okay, thank you everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Oh, it's been a super interesting session. I hope you've enjoyed it. Can I please ask you to fill in the evaluation form, which I think should be shared with you fairly soon. Can I thank you again to the Oak Foundation for supporting this today. Thank you so much to all of the speakers and panelists, and thank you as well to the delegates for sticking with us. I'm going to just remind you that the recording for this is going to be on our YouTube channel in the next week. And yeah, one last reminder, if you are in housing trouble, if you know anyone else who's in housing trouble, go to Shelter Cymru website and click Get Advice. It's the best advice I can give you. Diolch pawb. Thank you very much. Bye now.